I'm Craig Denlinger, Artesian CPA. We do financial statement audits for Reg A offerings and reviews for Reg CF offerings. Probably done about 90 altogether since this all went live. Hit the ground running. I actually started my firm for these regulations after being involved with this industry starting back in 2012. So we've done lots of work and seen lots of ups and downs in this, and I guess I was just planning on coming up here to take questions on anything anyone had as far as what needs to be done, rather than boring you all with the rules that you've probably seen and heard plenty of times. Did anyone have any questions?
When do you usually come into the process? At what point in time does it make sense to do so?
Yeah, as early as possible is the right answer there. 'Cause it's, especially with a Reg A audit, it's a long and difficult process going back to day one and gathering all the documentation we need to get through an audit, and just with limited resources that companies have to get financial statements together when they may or may not have even been tracking it in QuickBooks or anything from day one. Getting that all cleaned up is often a painful process, and so the sooner the better. In practice, usually we're getting referred in by attorneys and portals after the process is kind of kicked off.
How about state compliance? Is there anything about these different, whether it's Reg A, what have you, where you have to also do state filings?
With Reg CF and Reg A Tier 2, you're preempted from the state requirements, aside from doing the notice filings for about a dozen states, I think, require those for Reg A. For Tier 1, the SEC rules don't require an audit, so a lot of people were initially looking at that as, oh, here's one thing we can cut. And what they found out in practice is that then they go to the state review, and I think 2/3 of the states require an audit, so it doesn't save them anything. And so that's why Tier 1 is really not used, among other reasons. But and then with the Tier 1 Reg A's, you are also going through the coordinated state review process, and so lots of state involvement, making that a very painful process overall, and that's why it's not really used.
So according to the chart, for the first offering on Reg CF, they don't even have to have a review.
Under 100,000, they don't need a review, but they do need full GAAP financial statements. So they probably still need to hire me, because 95% of accountants don't know what GAAP is, which is this type of accounting rules to follow. You can, but you won't be doing it compliantly because your accountant doesn't know how to build the financial statements in the proper format. Most CPAs that are working with small businesses are tax-focused people, and they don't have this kind of SEC reporting experience. No, it has to be the same form. Theoretically, the only difference between those financials and the ones that we're issuing a review report is my review report being added. So we've done a lot of work on the under 100,000. A lot of companies are kind of taking the approach of, let's take the easiest, cheapest route at first. If we get to 100,000, we'll upgrade to a review. Yeah. And so we can help them out there, get a lower fee on the front end, and then upgrade as needed.
Reg CF, what do you have to do with and you're on the internet on a portal somewhere, what do you have to do with the states? Anything?
No, I don't think that there's any filings, at least on the accounting side. The SEC's rules cover everything you need to do, and I guess the big thing to point out with that is there's the annual filing report that Sarah Hanks was talking about. A lot of companies skirted those responsibilities and are now delinquent, and so we'll see how the SEC comes down on that. I'm sure it's not going to be good for the companies, but we will see very soon.
Now, with a Reg A Plus and you got 50 states, you have to pay a fee in every state still, even though you're exempt from the merit review, right?
I think it's about a dozen. Maybe one of the attorneys in here knows the answer to that. It's a notice filing. I think it ends up to somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000 of filing fees.
In total?
Yeah.
For all the states? Only
Yeah.
12 states require you to pay a fee?
It's something like that, yeah. And most of them are negligible, $100 or something like that. I think New York might be $1,500 or something like that. And I've seen the list before, but we don't really have to deal with that side of things. No one else wants to get bored with more accounting questions, huh?
So what's the difference in a Reg A Plus and then going on to the NASDAQ? Obviously, you've got some different reporting requirements.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the audit will feel pretty similar. for Reg A, you can do an AI CPA registered firm, which is what my firm is. To be on the NASDAQ, they have additional requirements of being a PCAOB registered firm, which is the biggest firms, and there's a lot of small players that are also PCAOB registered, but that's kind of restrained to the small cap world. The firms that have traditionally worked in that stuff are the ones that are registered there. So if that's the next step, that's something that you typically go with one of the PCAOB registered firms for to go with it.
He did his CPA was disqualified all of a sudden as a PCAOB firm, and all of a sudden he became a non-reporting company.
Yep.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that can happen. Yeah, that's the advantage of paying the extra money for one of the big firms. You know, they're not going anywhere like that, or if they do, it's going to be a really big deal, and you won't be the only really mad customer. Yeah.
As a CPA, are you having any issues with your malpractice coverage covering this type of work, or is that not an issue that CPAs are facing?
I was terrified of that, and year one, my insurance form didn't really have the right questions. So I got a hold of them like, hey, I'm a lot riskier than you think I am, and here's why. And they didn't really have an answer, so they just issued the policy. And then this year's renewal, they had additional questions to that effect, but it didn't have as big of an impact as I thought it would. They might learn, because I think litigation is in the future for the crowdfunding world. Too many lawyers in these rooms not to be, right?
Right. The other thing I was wondering about is, what do you tell your clients as far as what to budget for first year? I assume the highest cost is in the first year to get them organized. And then
Yeah, there's kind of a lot of upfront costs in getting it started, but generally most of the companies that are using, particularly Reg CF, they're so early stage that they haven't managed to, aside from their cap table, creates a lot of complexities, but their financial activity is pretty low risk and pretty easy to audit, you know, especially a pre-revenue company, which I'd say 80+% of my clients are. So there's a fair amount of upfront work, but it tends to be that the fees actually go up after year one because they're taking in money and deploying it, and so they're a much different company than they were when I first met them. And then that statement applies to 10% of them, and the other 90% don't need my services after a year, as you'd expect with this industry.
What percentage don't
Those are made up numbers. Do not quote those.
you see a large percentage that
Yeah, they didn't successfully raise money, so that's a huge chunk of them. I think a lot of them they're still in business, but they didn't raise money, so they don't need ongoing reporting.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I know you have a flight to leave. Thank you for all those good things you do
Thank you.
for crowdfunding.